Across the ditch now to the race that stops a nation. That's tomorrow, but the Melbourne Cup is being overshadowed by an expose that one researcher says is shaking the Australian horse racing industry to its core. Footage of trained and celebrated racehorses whipped and beaten, given electric shocks, kicked in the head and slaughtered at pet food knackeries where the law says they should not be. An ABC investigation is putting the heat on the New South Wales racing industry as it denies the scale of the carnage. It says around 34 horses a year end up at the slaughterhouse, but the 7:30 report investigation revealed there were more than 4,000 racehorses in the past year killed at one abattoir alone, with their identities laid bare due to the brandings of iconic horse studs. Now, Professor Paul McGreevy from Sydney University's School of Veterinary Science has done extensive research into the treatment of racehorses over the last 25 years. I started by asking him how the country is reacting to what was revealed by the ABC and a warning to those who are watching. There's some graphic footage in this story.
What we saw on ABC's 7:30 report really did shock the industry and the nation to its core, because we were seeing images of horses that were not supposed to be where they ended up in abattoirs and knackeries. There was a very bold step by Racing New South Wales to say that horses would not end up in those situations. And we were full of admiration when that statement was made in 2017. But then the footage became available to a journalist, and the ABC journalist showed me the footage, and I could very quickly see that the impact would be profound. The Australian public will not forget the vision of the use of electric shock devices on the genitals of horses, horses' heads being kicked by slaughtermen, and horses unfortunately receiving multiple captive bolt shots to the head, on one occasion 5 shots before the horse died. And what's particularly galling about this, I think, Alex, is that these are not feral animals that have to be herded and pushed and moved around as if they are intractable. These are animals that, as trained former racehorses, could have been led gently with a head collar to their demise. So it was. I think it was that combination of the animals being in the wrong place and being treated so poorly that has galvanised some opinion. The racing industry has certainly stepped up and said that they want to ensure that this never happens again. Yeah. But tracing horses is a big trick.
Right, yeah, and that seemed to be the real sort of killer blow in that investigation, to be able to trace the brandings of the horses back to particular studs, to particular racing studs that at least bred or maybe trained these racehorses. But to go back to what you said about the combination of that footage, that graphic footage, because I think anyone watching that would be dismayed that any animal is treated in that way. So perhaps there's that issue of how any ordinary animal is treated at a slaughterhouse. Also, combined with that as perhaps a separate issue, that these are racehorses that perhaps some of them are not past, racing, or they're just past their best, and they're part of a systematic approach of mass breeding, and where they cannot simply be put out to pasture once they are past their best. Talk to us about that.
Right, yeah, well, you touched on 2 important things there, Alex. It's worth thinking about the thoroughbred industry as being 2 industries. You've got the racing industry and the breeding industry. And the racing industry's job is to put on races with a high regard for welfare of horses and for the integrity of the horses on the track, the integrity of the races and the safety of the jockeys. The breeding industry supplies the animals for that spectacle, and there are big dollars involved in getting foals onto the ground. There's one horse in the Hunter Valley, not too far from me, whose service fee is well over $300,000 per pop. So there are big forces at play that want to keep the breeding industry very buoyant. There has been a retraction in numbers over the last 10 years or so, but we're dealing at the moment with somewhere around 13,000 to 14,000 foals hitting the ground every season, and the industry itself is beginning to recognise that could be excessive. There's one trainer, a leading trainer, who's suggested that 10,000 would be a better figure to aim for.
Right,
and
because it seems like the actual Racing Australia is in denial about the extent of this problem. They're saying, according to the ABC report, that around 34 horses a year are ending up at the slaughterhouses, but this ABC report heard that about 4,000 a year are being killed in one abattoir alone. So do you find perhaps that the industry still has to face up to the issue?
Yes, and that's why this has come at a very interesting time, Alex, because quite apart from this developing story, the government was looking at the merits of a national horse traceability register. So that was already in play. That's an attempt to keep every horse, not just racehorses, under some sort of monitoring system to know where they end up. And that, as it happens, was the initiative brought about by the mother of a young girl who died at a technical college at a TAFE in Dubbo. This young girl was on a Gillaroo course, and she was riding a horse that was branded a beginner's horse. It was labelled a beginner's horse, but it turned out when she unfortunately fell and died, that the coroner inquiry revealed that horse had been racing 3 weeks before he was used as a beginner's ride. So the impetus to get horses traced, to make sure that horses can be traced, came from this rather awfully sad story that galvanised this mother, Juliana Waugh, who's since got an Australian award for her work, to make sure that this doesn't happen again by ensuring that horses are traced.
This breeding program we're talking about, which is fueling the problem of these horses seemingly going en masse to the slaughterhouse, I guess it's to get faster, healthier, better performing, more productive horses that win you lots of prize money. But if you look at the Melbourne Cup tomorrow, it looks like more than half of the horses are coming from overseas. So, I mean, is the system even working at all in terms of breeding healthy Australian fast racehorses?
Well, Australia loves its 2-year-old racing, and that's quite a different game to the Melbourne Cup. Our obsession with finding the latest, greatest, fastest 2-year-old is probably core here, because our interest in finding those young horses means that we do get them into work very early, and the rather troubling statistic is that only 65% of the horses actually make it to the track. So the foals that are born of the foal crop every year, 35% don't even race. So we need to ask why that is and whether we could actually breed for more durable horses.
Finally, before you go, Paul, what's your observation of how this expose has impacted people's approach to the Melbourne Cup? It's a big thing. It's a public holiday in Victoria. There's lots of betting. People take the day off, or at least the afternoon off work in other states just to watch it. It's interesting. People in New Zealand take great interest in it as well. Has that waned? Is there a reaction? It's got its own problems. 6 racehorses have died in the last 6 years running that race as well, so it's got issues too.
Yes, it's an interesting social event, Alex. A lot of people don't really take much notice of the horses. They're there for what's called the nipple and the tipple. So I suppose there will be a thirst for that sort of celebration of Aussie devil may care attitude, but more and more people are saying nup to the cup. The Australian Greens are promoting that approach, and we're in interesting times because we may end up being world leaders in horse welfare if this galvanising process continues.
That's Professor Paul McGreevy. And if you are going to go back on Facebook or our website or YouTube and watch that story, just a warning, there are some graphic images, as was revealed in ABC's 7:30 report. There will be no doubt more on that. The Melbourne Cup was at 5 p.m. Our program time tomorrow, always the first Tuesday in November.